Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by bookyogaretreats.com. Bookyogaretreats.com is my favorite place to book yoga retreats as a teacher and a practitioner because it allows you to change everything in there. So you can choose your location, your dates, your price range that you're looking for, and then it brings up all the offerings. So as a practitioner, that's so amazing. And as a teacher, that's really great because you get people who are looking exactly for what you're offering. If you are interested in bookyogaretreats.com, go to mbomyoga.com/book yoga retreats. On to today's episode. I am very excited to be joined by special guest Don Mauricio, who is joining me from Montreal, Quebec. Don is somebody who I know of through a couple of yoga teacher friends based out of Banff. She taught at last year's Banff Yoga Festival, and I was really sad to miss her because I've heard great things about her yoga teaching and her meditation. But I'm super excited that I had the opportunity to chat with her on the show this week. And this episode, we talk about all things yoga business. We talk about how Dawn got from working full-time corporate to teaching full-time, but teaching in a really sustainable way, offering retreats and workshops, teaching at festivals, co-teaching with teacher trainings, and being a guest presenter for other people's teacher trainings, and so much more. So if you're looking to take your business to the next level, take your teaching to the next level, learn a little bit more about how you can be a sustainable full-time yoga teacher, this episode is definitely for you. So without further ado, here's Dawn. Welcome to the podcast today, Dawn. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
And are you joining me from Montreal?
I am, from my living room in Montreal.
Amazing. Well, it's amazing to have you here on the show. And I want to talk a ton about all the wonderful things you've done with your yoga career, but I thought a good place to start would be to back up a little bit and talk about how you first got into yoga.
Okay, so I really attribute my beginnings in yoga to the years that I spent playing basketball. So in high school and even in CEGEP. So CEGEP is a Quebec thing. I think it's like college everywhere else. I'm not too sure. But I played basketball along with other sports like field hockey and track and field. But I think there was something around just being really in my body after every game or every practice, just feeling the blood pumping through, my heart beating, noticing my breath a lot more. And then when I went into university, I stopped playing organized sports. And I knew that I was missing something. And I did the typical, went to the gym, worked out, tried, I think back then it was like Taibo. I might be dating myself right now, but back then it was like Taibo classes were really a thing. And then I was never really into any of them until I tried yoga. And then there was just this mindfulness, this connection to the body of how it was whilst I was practicing that really blew my mind. And then that's what kind of piqued my curiosity. However, it wasn't like this love at first sight kind of thing. I didn't understand poses like Shavasana. It drove me nuts. Like, just lying around for 10 minutes. So it took me a while to get used to that. But that's really how I started getting into yoga. And I think how I got really serious about it though was after a breakup. So kind of like through the door of suffering where I had a particularly bad breakup and, the only respite I had from say the crying or the questioning about what went wrong or whatever came from when I practiced. So it was like one of the few times that I would like have a break from crying. And then that's what got me on the mat on a very regular basis. And I think because my heart was broken in a lot of ways, it was also open. And so I was able to kind of really get all of the benefits and start feeling into the emotional side of the practice.
Wow. Yeah, that's an amazing story. It's interesting because there's so many people that I've talked to, and I had the experience myself where coming to yoga was coming from doing other physical activities. And it took me years to understand Shavasana. And it's interesting when you transition as a teacher and then you watch people in Shavasana and you watch the people who just sit there with their eyes open and you know that they're going through their to-do list or they're thinking about, how rude would it be to leave right now because I really am not getting anything out of this. And to just have that experience personally and then see that as a teacher also.
Exactly. Totally. And then it helps remind me when I do see those students, and like I had one of those last night in my class, to try and meet the students where they are, because who knows what is going on. And over the years, what has helped me also create space for that is not only may they just be with a busy mind or whatnot, but who knows if something happened to them in their life where they may not actually feel safe in a room of strangers with their eyes closed. And so I don't know what people are necessarily coming with, but I want to make room for, if that is actually what you're walking in with, that's also welcome here, and we can work with that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great place to come from. And I think that it's always important as a teacher to remember that there's, you really know nothing about the people in your class and where they're coming from and what's brought them to that class. And people have, different experiences, some of them good, some of them bad, that make them feel certain ways within the class.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And I think at some point, and I think these are still quite popular, but specialized classes like trauma yoga, for example. But I think it's safe to say that to some degree, everyone who comes into the room or in any room at any time has experienced some sort of trauma or has certain special needs or access needs that we're not aware of. And so if we come from that kind of mindset as well, one that is also open and loving to these circumstances, then we can really create this warm and inviting environment for students to really drop down, let go, and also accept themselves as they are, not needing to feel like, okay, because everyone's eyes are closed, I have to do this, and then them be in agony for those 10 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. And so for you in your journey, you came to yoga from this place of needing to heal. And then did you just continue? Did you fall in love with it at that point and just continue to practice?
Totally. What really piqued my interest was when I started feeling the effects of the yoga poses, and without knowing, because I hadn't really done a lot of reading as to like what, say, hip openers do or this and that. And so I just noticed, because I was in such this vulnerable, open and sensitive place, that if I went to a hip opener class, I would be like this basket case afterwards. I'd be crying. And then, or if I went to a more vigorous class that had, say, a lot of inversions, then I really felt strong and empowered. And so I started seeing, or feeling rather firsthand, the metaphors of the poses in the practice in my own body and life. And then I was really curious. I was like, what does this all mean? Like, there's definitely something happening. And then it was through the reading and researching that I got hooked. And I was like, wow, all of this is possible just when we roll out like our rubber rectangle kind of thing. Like, this is at our fingertips. And so that's what really got me hooked. And then also the whole idea of just having some relief from the suffering that I was going through. And I did attribute it a lot to the yoga poses themselves. But then pretty early on, I realized that it wasn't where I managed to put my foot that made me feel happy necessarily. It was more the fact that I was turning inwards, focusing on my body, my breath, my heart and mind right now. So in the present moment. And so then that's what also started getting me curious about meditation.
Okay. And so from there, your practice grew more into not just the physical asana, but sitting silently and turning inwards with the meditation piece.
Totally. I actually would say that as much as I loved my asana practice before I started meditation, I really feel like it expanded or it deepened infinitely or exponentially as soon as I started adding the mindfulness component to it. And it was more than just, say, sitting before or after my practice, but it was also trying to treat my practice as a meditation and movement as well. That really, really helped to deepen my sense of awareness in the poses. And it removed any importance of, again, what the body can do. And it really helped cultivate this sense of being able to meet and even love my body for exactly how it was in that moment. And so even now, after say like years of practice, I've been traveling a lot recently and on planes and trains and things like that. And my hamstrings I feel like they've gotten 6 inches shorter. And so I noticed that I was thinking like, but I'm a yoga teacher. I should have hamstrings that are like this and I should be able to do that. But I think it was really because of my meditation practice that I could catch my mind and say, don't go into those kinds of thoughts. They're not really helpful. And then also to be like, okay, and it's like this right now. I can't do anything other than just really greet my body lovingly and continue my practice. Not necessarily grieving, oh, it could have been like this, or being hard on myself, but really being able to meet myself where I am. And I think the more I'm able to do that with myself, my own practice, it again transfers out into the way that I teach. But I think, or hopefully, I guess we have to ask like my mom and boyfriend, and my friends, but also how I treat others. Like I really hope that I'm able to transfer it out to others as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's such an amazing place to come from, and to be able to get to a place where, you can notice the frustration in your own body and then go, well, I'm just going to meet myself where I am right now and understand that this is, where my body's at, and that's okay. It's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah. And even though I'm saying it pretty fluidly, it took me a really long time, and I still think it's a work in progress. But I try and celebrate or notice when I am able to be loving and patient with myself, as opposed to judging or berating myself when I'm not, as a way to kind of self-motivate me to continue going in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. And so at what point were you inspired to take your personal practice into teaching?
So I think I had been practicing for 5 or 6 years, and previously I was in marketing, and I had worked in marketing, but wasn't happy in that field. And then I quit, traveled through Southeast Asia where I did my first meditation retreat, and then came back and went back to what I was working at before I went into marketing, which was a hair salon receptionist. And so I was kind of like just killing time doing that, practicing yoga on the side, reading these books and doing my own thing. And I was kind of waiting for like a sign. To make it sound a little cliche. But then one hairdresser was doing the hair of a yoga teacher. And the hairdresser, when I was like cashing out the sale or the cut, he said, oh, Dawn practices yoga. And then that teacher just happened to say, well, I'm running a training. Why don't you come and do it? And I said yes, only because I was like, well, it's something to do. And, it's again a way to kill time. And I want to learn more about my practice and myself. But it was really not to become a yoga teacher. At the same time, I was also volunteering at a yoga studio just so I could like get free yoga kind of thing. And, and then after I did the training, I think it was like, just even an introductory, like 100 hours over 2 weeks. When I got back, I think a few weeks later, the studio that I was volunteering at, the owner knew I did a training mostly because I had to take 2 weeks off of my volunteer shift. And so she so happened to find herself without a teacher for one of her classes that had a replacement originally. And so she asked me to teach that. And as terrified as I was, I said yes, because she was really in a jam. And it was a terrible class. It still haunts me, where I wrote out my sequence to the T, and I think because I was so nervous, I went through it really quickly, that after when I saw that I was at the end of my sequence, I looked at the time and I had 25 minutes left.
Oh no.
It was such a nightmare. But I guess the owner got good enough feedback despite that train wreck, that she offered me 1 to 2 classes a week on the schedule after that. And so that's what kind of got me on the teaching train. But I do have to say that it was feeling how much it helped me and how much it gave me solace and helped me learn more about myself and in ways that I can transfer out into the world so that I could be a better person to the people around me. That was the huge motivation. And it just so happened that I had green lights to follow along the way where I was offered classes here and there. So that's what definitely helped me become a yoga teacher.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious, what did you do with those extra 25 minutes in that first class?
Oh my God. So I redid some of the same standing sequences that I had planned out, but I think it was so noticeable that I was nervous because I was kind of started jumbling my words. And then a couple of students were like looking kind of confused all of a sudden. And so that kind of threw me off even more. And then I really had to kind of come back to my body, because if I was looking to see their approval in some way, then that was still going to throw me off. So I came back to my body and did the best I could, repeated some of the same standing sequences. And then I threw in, I think, a long pigeon or something like that. And then that took care of the 25 minutes.
Oh man, that makes me think back to my first class too, which there was not 25 minutes left at the end. But I think that it's just one of these things where we can look back and just be like, oh, that was not good. Like going too fast, jumbling words because you're nervous, like planning every single thing you're going to say.
Exactly. And, you know, it's times like those, I've had many of those. And it's times like those that has helped me now be so comfortable with going on the fly, where in the past, I remember blocks being a central part to a particular class I planned going into, I was teaching, I think, in a gym setting at that time. And then all the blocks were taken away for whatever reason. And then thinking, okay, I have 60 beginners in front of me because the gym was just, packed in that way. And I have no blocks and I had to figure it out on the fly. And so now I think because I've gone through so many of those uncomfortable experiences at the beginning of teaching, that now I feel like I'm a lot more versatile for it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like those experiences really do challenge you in a way that it's good. It makes you trust in yourself, I think. Yeah.
In the moment, they're totally cringeworthy, I think. But as more time goes on and you're like, okay, I survived that. Everyone seems okay. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, definitely. And so after you started teaching, you had these regular classes. And what did the evolution of your career look like from there?
So that first season, I had 1 or 2 classes, I forget. And then I was replacing at that studio. At the same time, when I started thinking that I actually like this enough to try and do this more, I was also still supplementing my income, where I think I was still at the hair salon as a receptionist, and they were really supportive with arranging my schedule. And I think I also supplemented that with like seasonal work, working at like Indigo bookstore for the Christmas season. So it's not like I managed to jump in headfirst full time right away. And then after that season, I started approaching gyms and other studios to teach. And a lot of times I would get maybe 1 or 2 classes. And I think I went from say 2 to 6 classes the next season, which is fairly quick, I think, nowadays. And then from 6 to 10 classes, all the while still supplementing my income. And at some point along there, I had, I think, quit the hair salon, was no longer doing the seasonal work at Indigo, but then was managing a yoga studio like 20 hours a week. So yeah, mostly because as I was getting started teaching all of these public classes at gyms and studios, because I was brand new, I wasn't making that much. I think at the gym, I was making something like $20 an hour, and I had to travel to get there, at least half an hour. So it was like $20 for 2 hours of my time, basically. And now that I think back, I think that sounds a little outrageous, but I was just so keen to get experience, and then also eventually exposure through word of mouth or just by talking to other people and practicing at other studios and trying to get into those studios too. So it was really just kind of like anywhere and everywhere. And at the same time, when I could, I was getting certified in other things too. I did prenatal, I did a kids certification, just because I didn't know exactly what I would like. What if only teaching kids yoga was my jam, or only prenatal, so I wanted to also test out a few different areas of specialization. And I think I tried sports yoga at one point too. And so I was also getting certified in different things and trying different approaches. And then I did that for about 2 or 3 years, like the hustle. I remember something like teaching 18 classes one week for one season. And that was too much, definitely. And yet, because I was getting paid so little, it was necessary. But then, as I said, those times, it just really helped me become a better teacher, teaching in like gyms where air conditioning is full blast. It's called power yoga, but then you have only beginners, and then you have like the radio blasting and all of these weights dropping loudly. So it's just like, how do you make a yoga experience given that? Or in a community center where there are no accessories, so it really definitely made me a stronger teacher for that.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite the journey to have had in your first couple of years.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot from different people about in the first couple of years, like the hustle, like you mentioned. So you're teaching, a lot of classes. You're not really making, enough money to be like living comfortably. Lots of people have, side gigs on the side, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that's kind of a necessary thing for new yoga teachers to go through?
I do think so. Perhaps I'm only speaking from my own experience, and I'm sure that there's a few anomalies or exceptions out there where they manage to jump in head first right away, full time. But I really do think we need to kind of spread our wings, get out anywhere and everywhere, not just so that we can make ends meet financially, but just so that we can figure out who we are as a yoga teacher as well. If we stay, for example, in the same studio that we volunteered at and did our training at, that's only one approach, and that might really work, but we actually might not know that other approaches exist that might speak to us more. So in that way, I also think it is really important. I think also, especially nowadays with social media, that teaching yoga has this kind of glamorous appeal or look. And so when people leave their stressful I say marketing because that was me, stressful jobs, and then they go into yoga, I think they see it as this sort of rescue, and that it'll all work out because the universe says so, or the universe has our back. And yet I think there needs to be this balance of like, yes, the universe has our back, and yet we do also have to choose wisely. And so I think usually what weeds out so many teachers from actually succeeding is those first few years. If they're able to manage to survive those first 2 or 3 years of the extreme hustle, then usually those are the teachers that end up teaching for many years, in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes sense for sure. And so for you did that for a couple of years, and then how did you transition from there? Like, what did that look like?
I think after, like, I would say around my 4th year, I started noticing that I had this luxury of being able to start choosing the classes I was teaching. And it wasn't necessarily choosing the classes at a studio, but also in regards to like the contracts, like my corporate contracts. So I started kind of being able to see, okay, what made sense, what didn't make sense. So I think one season on a Tuesday, I had something like 8 classes in one day in seven different locations.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I remember, I think I cried the night before because I was like, how am I going to do it this season with this? Anyways, I survived, and yet I also learned. And so it was just like, okay, this class that I absolutely love, but it takes me an hour and a half to get there and it pays $25 might not be the class for me to keep on my schedule. So it just started becoming, I started having a lot more options in what I could choose and what I want to keep on my schedule. And that was really simply from just having put myself out there so much in the first few years, and teachers knowing my name, studio owners as well. And then them having asked me to replace their classes in the past. And so me getting into different communities in that way, led me to that. And so I managed, I think, to cut down how many places I was teaching at around my fourth year, and also being able to supplement my income with corporate classes and privates. And it was around that time that I started also playing with workshops, or the idea of workshops. And what's great about having a home studio or a few studios that you teach at is you can really gauge interest by having conversations or dialogues with the students that you trust, and being like, would you be into learning more about backbends, or would you want to learn more about hip openers or this and that, and kind of gauging interest, and then creating a workshop and going from there. And then after having created one workshop, like refining, and if I was teaching at 3 studios, then trying to pitch that workshop at all of those studios. So starting to also branch out into the workshop setting. But that took me a few years because I want to really build up the experience of teaching a certain, say, area or certain group of poses before I would dive into it. I think sometimes one of the mistakes that beginner yoga teachers can make is throwing themselves in too quickly into things like workshops or running retreats. And when they don't succeed because of maybe a lack of a student base to pitch this to, or maybe on retreat things happen that you weren't prepared for, and that was perhaps because of just only 6 months of teaching yoga. And then what happens is they might give up on retreats and workshops altogether, and then they realize teaching only public classes is not feasible, and then they decide, okay, then teaching yoga is not for me. So I think sometimes that's one of the pitfalls or the traps.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing to consider. That I actually, I'm thinking about, have I thought about that or not? And I feel like maybe I hadn't thought about it directly like that, but I think it makes sense to make sure that you really have that base built up before you dive into something else. I guess a question there is, how do you kind of know when you're ready? Because I think that there's sometimes this thing that people talk about in yoga where, people come out of teacher trainings, they're like, I'm not ready to teach my first class. And there's this certain level of like, you've kind of just got to jump with both feet and just trust that you're going to learn from that experience. Where do you feel like that line is with workshops and retreats?
I think it's really this combination of the two. So I love that you mentioned the two extremes, where jumping in 2 feet first, and then also that hesitation that I think comes with a lot of new yoga teachers of like, oh my God, I'm not ready, because we start opening the door to what yoga has to offer, and we realize it's an ocean of knowledge and we will never learn enough, and I'm going to break somebody, and all of these other fears come up. And I think in those moments, it's really important to have a mentor or a teacher and really bounce off ideas like, what do you think? Because I think that a mentor who really cares about you will be honest and say, I think you're ready to start teaching classes, but maybe not only to this population, because that actually takes a little bit of extra training. Or maybe you should hold off on workshops, or have you thought about this in retreats? So a mentor or a teacher can really go from or draw from their own experience, their years of having teaching and made the same mistakes perhaps, and really help guide new teachers. And so I think that is really helpful, because sometimes there are some students who are so gung-ho, and actually they might need a little bit of extra guidance. And what happens is they're so gung-ho, there's no mentor or teacher to bounce off ideas off of. And then they might actually injure somebody in one of their classes. So I think it's that really good balance of a mentor can help kind of put things in perspective for those who are a little too gung-ho, and then to really encourage and support those who are a little too resistant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great piece of advice. And then for you, did you have a mentor that helped you kind of figure out, like, as you were going through your career?
I did. And it ended up being a few of the teachers that I was co-teaching with in studios, that had been teaching a few years more than me, and that we really got along with well. And I felt completely at ease and comfortable asking for feedback and guidance, because we are all human, us yoga teachers. And so sometimes personalities will clash. And just because someone, say, owns a studio or was your teacher trainer, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best fit for your mentor or to offer you guidance, because they might feel threatened that you might be taking their job, or I don't know. There are many reasons why, and a lot are often unknown. And so it's, who do you feel like you can be supported by, but lovingly? Because I think we're so fragile and nervous when we're starting, especially those who are resistant to teaching. That was me. That any sort of feedback can be make or break. And so when the person that we ask guidance from really loves us, and really loves the practice of teaching and the practice of yoga, that to me would be a good fit.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then how did you get into, being a guest teacher with other people's teacher training programs and teaching at festivals and all of that sort of thing?
So I've been teaching 12 years, and I think from the very start, and I really think this is thanks to my marketing background. From the start, I really tried to treat any collaboration or relationship I got into, whether it was like boss and teacher at a studio, or whether I was an ambassador for a brand, or any collaborations like that, I really saw it as a relationship where it was a give and take, not as if like they owe me stuff and they should be doing these things for me. And I think what has happened as a result is I've managed to stay on good terms with like every studio that I've ever taught at. Most of the teachers, I'd say, I can't even think of one that I'm on bad terms with. So I really try, and even all of the brands that I was associated with, even if I'm no longer an ambassador for them, I know that I could still email them up and ask for help. It's really this open relationship that I try and keep. And I think over the years, as I started kind of diving deeper into, say, meditation, the studios that I used to teach at would invite me back to lead workshops there. And it was really nice because I've stayed friends with the owner. So it was nice to return in that capacity, but also to see some of the students that I hadn't seen in years. And then for festivals, a lot of times it was, word of mouth, because I think I've managed to keep such good relations with so many teachers that they would say, recommend me whenever someone was like, we need meditation at this festival. And so someone would be like, you should reach out to Dawn. And that's how I would get hooked up with these festivals. And so I would say that it's a large part because of the relationships that I've cultivated over the years. I think I practiced with, when I practiced with Richard Rosen once, and he said, look around the room in this training, because he had met Rodney Yee in one of his trainings, and they're, these two ultra famous teachers who have been friends for over 40 years. And he said, you just don't know who your lifelong friends will be and who the next generation of yoga teachers will be. And they're probably in this room. And so I really love that he pointed that out, because it's exactly, I think that has helped me get where I am. It's not, by no means is it only because of me, but rather it's the support of the others or the people around me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it sounds like, I mean, that's a very clear example of the power of creating relationships and word of mouth, and how when you talk about what you're doing and you ask what other people are doing, they remember those things stick in their mind. And then when somebody that they're talking to needs somebody who does, meditation or yoga, you come to mind for them.
Mm-hmm. And then I try and return the favor as well. When someone needs a specialist in this, I really try and reciprocate. So again, because it is still this give and take relationship that doesn't just end with them having recommended me. And I think also, it's so easy as a yoga teacher to fall in the trap of we need to be competitive against each other. And I think that's actually to our detriment. And what often happens is we are the ones who get burned, not necessarily the teachers who we feel like are threatening us. For example, if we might violate a contract we have with, say, one brand as an ambassador because we got an opportunity to be featured on another brand's, competing brand's website or social media. But it's like coming back to the relationship aspect. It's like that competing brand might want to feature you once, and yet what about the years that other brand has supported you? Is that being considered? So, and going forward, the future of your relationships. It's like, sometimes it's necessary to end relationships with brands or people, but to do so with a lot of consideration and with care, I think still really helps to take care of everyone involved.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is like thinking about, what your goal is in the end and kind of playing the long game instead of the short game. Like, I think it's easy to look at like a social media account and be like, oh, this company that has 1 million followers wants to feature me.
Exactly.
Like, I'll just go against, what I signed, but thinking about, how that impacts your life in the long term, if that's what you want to do as a career.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think, with social media as well, it really starts kind of clouding up the image in a way where we forget about the depth or profundity of relationships and how valuable they can be. And we get lost a little bit in the glossiness of okay, but this looks really good because that account has 1 million followers. So
totally. Yeah. It's easy to get lost in the weeds there, kind of like forget your why or your purpose a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'm curious if there's any other, I guess, things that you kind of took from the marketing world that you've applied to your career as a yoga teacher that people listening might not necessarily think about, or they might not know about because they don't have that background.
I love that question. I think from working in the business world, it was a certain level of professionalism. I think is what I often get reflected back as something that people appreciate. So answering, say, emails in a timely way, even if it might mean saying, I'm on retreat right now and I won't be able to get back to this email, but right away, but I've received it. So let me get back to you in X amount of time. Or invoicing in a timely way as well. Things like that. Being on top of my schedule, I find has been an advantage. Sometimes I've heard of teachers forgetting about how many classes they were replacing and didn't show up to classes. So the whole organizational side of things, I generally like, and it comes naturally to me. And I think maybe that's why I went into business in the first place. But I do see, or I do hear from studios that I interact with that they really appreciate that. Or just when someone asks me for a workshop description, I get it to them as soon as I can. And I try and be honest in terms of how long it might take me to get something to them, so that they're just not left in the air, but rather everyone is clear. So there's that. And then I think the clear communication side of things, just, trying to honor truthfulness for myself and maybe others, saying like, this actually doesn't feel comfortable for me, or can we do it like this? So trying to really have it all out so that there's no room for any passive aggressivity or resentment. And I think at the end of the day, we might interpret things in a certain way, but everyone just really wants what's best. And it might not feel like that. So sometimes I think it's easy to get defensive when dealing with studios or on the business side of things for yoga. But it's really just that studio owners really want what's best for the studio and their students. And we as teachers also want that. So can we soften the dialogue if it ever gets a little bit hard? So a little bit of that too, like taking responsibility and trying to soften there.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you brought up all of those things, because they're things that I, came from a business background as well. And I feel like I also kind of have a natural tendency to be more organized, and things like email communication and clear communication are so important to me. And I think that it's something that more people in the yoga industry should be placing importance on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I hear some teachers say something like, oh, I haven't checked my email in X amount of days, or they don't reply back. And I don't really believe that it is our responsibility to reply to every single email, especially if it's an email that is kind of like a cold call, like someone that you've never met and they're asking a very general question. And yet I do think there does need to be this recognition that even though we're dealing with, technology, that there is still humans or humanity behind it. So to keep in mind that people might be counting on you, and so they would appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point as well, because I think that, the more that your name gets out there, you get a lot of things from people that you don't know, and some of them are, legitimate and things you want to engage with, and others are not so much, or they feel a little bit spammy. But having kind of like a method to deal with those different types of emails.
Exactly. And I think at the beginning, for many years, I answered every single email. But as the years go on, where I'm getting a lot more emails that I need to take care of, given, say, workshops or events that I'm teaching at, but then also a lot more of the cold call emails, it's becoming more challenging. And I realize that it's not necessarily the people who are in my inbox that are putting the pressure on me. It's rather myself putting the pressure on, I got to do this. And so to also try and ease up in that way. I find like when it comes to the business side of yoga, what sometimes get lost is the yoga side of the business of yoga.
Yeah.
So it's like we tend to think like, oh, I'm a yoga teacher, and we are a certain way in our life and to our students and while teaching. But then when we're sitting at a desk alone, say at home or in a cafe, we might forget that we're still embodying yoga. And so it's like, can we be gentle with ourselves, but also to those we're communicating with? So I really love the idea of the yamas and niyamas in terms of dealing with yoga as a business. So it's like, can I communicate without harm? Can I be truthful to myself and others? Like, that pay rate actually doesn't sit well with me. And so can I communicate that clearly instead of being annoyed or something like that and not actually telling the studio owner? Can I credit others where credit is due? So, whether it's on social media or when you're teaching, like, oh, I got this next move from one of my friends who's a yoga teacher, and then that can apply to like the non-stealing part of things. And then I love the idea of like non-hoarding, the aparigraha, where it's like, am I booking extra classes or workshops out of fear or out of necessity? And that one is still hard for me to kind of untangle, because a lot of times it's like, but I love what I do, but then I'm burnt out as well. So it's like that non-greed in terms of booking, classes and workshops. And
yeah. I think that one of the things that I've heard really commonly, you just kind of addressed really clearly, like people say, I don't know how to balance the business side of what I do with being a yoga teacher. And I love that you brought in this philosophical concept from the yoga practice as a way to keep yourself in check with your business and keeping that balance. I think that's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. And so with the last concept that you were talking about, like with that, finding that balance between, understanding why you're saying yes to certain things and if they're serving you and, if it's coming from a place of fear or necessity. Do you have any tips for somebody listening who's like, yes, I deal with that too? And I know you said that's still something that you're, figuring out, but do you have any tips as to how to kind of untangle that?
Yeah. And what comes to mind is just really this awareness of the body. I feel like there's so much wisdom the body has to tell us. We're just not often listening. So, for example, it's like when you show up to one of these classes, tuning in, like, how are you energetically? Are you exhausted? Are you regretting going to teach that class? Kind of like, oh, I can't believe I said yes to this. What is your heart and mind like? Are you kind of annoyed that you have to be there? Would you rather be somewhere else? So things like that, like paying attention to the subtleties. And it might not even be so subtle. We might know very clearly that we don't want to be in a certain place. And we're fulfilling it because we made a commitment, which I think is honorable. I love keeping my word as best I can. But then also not letting it end there, the messages from the body, but reevaluating. And I think balance is this moving spot, this moving point that we never actually really get to. And so and I think that it's actually exciting because it almost forces us to continue paying attention to the moment because we can never get to that point of balance, for an enduring or a long point of time. For example, like if 1 week my schedule feels really good, I can't think, okay, so teaching 5 classes a week is my sweet spot because next week I might fall ill and 5 classes might be too much, or the week after 5 classes might not actually be financially sustainable. So I need to move things around. So it's always changing as we are changing. So it's like to also treat it as this practice where we turn inwards and we try and learn from every experience and then recalibrate as new opportunities come up. And it's a refined practice where we get better at tuning into what our body is telling us as time goes on. I think when I first started teaching and I had those like 15 to 20 classes a week, I remember pretty regularly in the first year and a half of teaching, every 6 months, I would be so exhausted, I would cry. And then after the third time, I was like, something has to change. Like I can't keep burning myself out every 6 months. And it took me a long time, a year and a half, to really start listening. But if we start listening, or whenever we start listening, it's great. And so, but the messages are there from the beginning, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that as yoga teachers, it's like we often, and especially with meditation, I mean, one of the biggest things is that you sit and one of the first cues is, how are you feeling today? Like, do a once over your body. How is your body feeling in this moment? And how we cue that as yoga teachers, but sometimes it's harder to kind of reflect that back on us. Like, how are we feeling as we're teaching this class? Like, how does my body feel physically?
Yeah. And I love exactly how you phrased it. How am I feeling in this moment? And we cue that. And even if we have our own practice that we have in the morning and we tune in the exact same way, it's the key words you use were in this moment. So it's like when we're hours away from our morning practice, kilometers away or miles away, if you have American listeners, from our home where we did our home practice, can we still tune in? How am I in this moment? And I think that's where it gets forgotten, like the checking into the body at as many times throughout the day as possible. So it's like even answering emails. It's like getting an email we don't really like. And so we're pounding away at the keyboard, but then it's like, can we take a moment? How am I in this moment? Wow. Okay. There's a lot of anger here. And then from there, after just recognizing, we can choose wisely. Like, maybe I shouldn't answer this email yet. Maybe I should write this email, but send it to a friend who can give me feedback instead, or, something like that. So we can choose perhaps differently.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great way to think about that. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm wondering if there's any other business lessons that you've learned along your journey as a teacher that you want to share with listeners.
Yeah, I would say maybe I was like, what to choose. I would say a couple things in particular. This one I alluded to already before, but this idea of trial and error and refining as you go. So I think sometimes, especially as a new teacher, we might try something like a workshop or running a retreat, get burned or feel like that went horribly and then never go back, but rather to, from the start, create a space inside of yourself that allows for imperfection or mistakes. And then to look at every single opportunity or every single mistake as a learning opportunity. And so it's like, okay, that workshop didn't work well. I'm embarrassed. I'm cringing right now. So let me think about it in a few days, because right now it's still very hurtful, or I'm still really embarrassed by it. And then in a few days, come back to your reflection and be like, what didn't work? What worked? Okay, let me refine what worked and change what didn't work. So I think that is a key component. And then it'll actually also make you a better teacher for it as you keep doing so. And then I'd say the other part is to not put pressure on yourself right away to make teaching yoga your only livelihood from the start. You might need to supplement or diversify your income for a long time. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure by any means, but rather that you're doing this smart and intelligently. Because if we can supplement or diversify our income at the start, then we won't need to burn ourselves out teaching yoga. And then we'll be able to show up a lot more wholesomely and skillfully for our students. And we'll actually be able to teach what we're preaching. No, preach? Yes. What? We'll be able to live what we're teaching, basically.
Yeah, no, definitely. That makes sense for sure. I think that's such a great point to bring up too.
Yeah. We're in the business of self-care. And so I see so many yoga teachers who are burnt out, and I'm not saying that that's bad. It's just, can we learn from it? It's like, okay, I'm burnt out. What needs to change so that I could really be this example for my students?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought that up. And I mean, we could have an entire other episode on that.
Yeah.
Burnout's so key to try and prevent, but also you kind of have to find that point in order not to get there again.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Well, I know that you've got to get going, and I really, really appreciate your time today, Dawn. I'm curious where people can go to find out more about you.
I am so happy that we had this chat, I just want to say. So thank you for reaching out to me. So via my website, so dawnmauricio.com, and there are links to ways that people can practice with me, whether they would like to travel. So I often give a lot of things in the Northeast US, Canada. And so if you want to come over this way, but I also have many online offerings. There's a meditation app that I've been involved in called Neo Travel Your Mind. I also have another online meditation program. I have yoga videos somewhere online, and that's all linked on my website.
Amazing. I'm definitely going to go check more of that out then. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really great chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
As usual, I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode of the show as much as I did. I always love recording those conversations, so I'm super, super excited to share them with you guys. If you want to check out more of what we talked about, there's links and show notes up at www.mbomyoga.com. You can also find the link for the newsletter, which goes out about once a month up there. You can find all the latest blog posts. If you want to follow along with MBOM on social media, it's at Mastering the Business of Yoga on Facebook and Instagram. I also started a private Facebook community just for you guys to talk about all things business of yoga related, and that is Yoga Business Badasses. You can search that in the Facebook search bar. You can find it in the description for this episode or on the show notes. As always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.